Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, you read a good chunk on James there that you have in the Christ myth theory and its problems. This seems to be the number one place that historicists would go to prove there was a historical Jesus. And you covered a lot of material there. What are some of the, people who've come at this and said, nah, we don't believe what you're saying? And have you engaged anyone that's, obviously a scholar in this area? And how has that discussion come?
Well, the only one I know about is our friend Bart. He pretty much ridiculed the parallel with Hong Ziquang, the Taiping Messiah, as being too distant a parallel, but I got the impression he was trying to say that the one was dependent on the other or something, whereas I'm trying to say this is a diachronic, not a synchronic parallel. In other words, certain things you compare through time, and they don't have to be at the same time. And of course, that's if you might go synchronically, that is the with time, if you were trying to prove dependence. And that is what I'm doing with Thomas being the twin brother of Jesus. That's close enough to be in pretty much the same milieu, so it strikes me as legitimate. He thought that it was just irrelevant to bring in the Chinese Messiah. But I don't think it is once you understand the difference between synchronic and diachronic. It's like when scholars try to bring to bear parallels from the cargo cults of Melanesia onto Christianity, as John Gager and a number of others have done, and it seems like that's entirely legitimate, because you're showing how in a similar crisis situation people will react to what looks like in the same way. And you're not saying the one got the idea from the other, but this is the kind of thing that happens, so it's a plausible historical analogy. Well, when I invoke the thing with the ethnological myths, the genealogies and all that, he seemed to think that was utterly beside the point. Again, I don't quite get it, because if there's no reason that the same sort of thing with eponymous ancestors and all that, which is widespread in the ancient world, would not still be used in sectarian formation, because that's kind of what was happening in the Old Testament. They had no idea how these groups came about or in what way they were related to each other, though they did know how they got along in their day and where they were. That's why there's stories like about Lot and his daughters. Apparently the Israelites didn't much care for the Ammonites and the Moabites. They fought and so on. So but apparently they were close enough and had the same language and so on, that they figured, well, we must be related to them, but because of this circumstance, well, no wonder they're a bunch of morons, they're a bunch of mental defectives, and because that must have been part of the fear of incest in the ancient world, like it still is. But they would posit that this one was related to that one, and they would stipulate the names of the tribes of the sons of Ishmael, and there's 12 of them, I believe. and the Keturah tribes and so on. Did they have any evidence that that Moses was married to this one or Abraham to that one? No, they just assumed that must be the case, to sort of taxonomical thing, a way of a principle for grouping these different peoples. And it seems to me that's analogous to Luke making John the Baptist Jesus' cousin, and very likely with James being made what did I just say? James his brother. And so I think something similar, though I didn't get into that here, was the list of sect figureheads in 1 Corinthians. Some say, I'm of Paul, I belong to Apollos or Cephas or Christ. That seems to me to demand that they were actually alternative sect figureheads, whether historical or not, but that people figured that they were, and they're at least, I mean, we don't even really know that, but presumably they did, like people thought that Mithras was historical and Krishna. I mean, there's no way, but they just assumed there was, and resorted to Euhemerism, right? They said, well, yeah, it's a little hard to believe that this guy survived the attack of a bull and broke its neck, but that's maybe the story's grown in the telling, and there really was a Mithras, or like I like to say, maybe Ares was a great general, and Apollo ran a tanning salon or something, and that's the next step you make in a case like that. Well, I think that's very likely what happened here. And why do we hear of the cousin business or the brother business here suddenly? And
you brought up the Catholic Church too, and the tradition has that these couldn't have been biological kin. The only way that they could is that in an adoptive sense they had to be cousin, because they were children of Joseph. And I don't know if that's later tradition trying to slap on, but regardless, I think it's interesting whether they had some type of Mary had to remain perpetually virgin, etc., if that's their primary reason, or if they're looking at it and saying, look, it's not as clear cut as you would say either. That's why they could use something like this instead of like what most people who are historicists say. They'll go, it's obvious. This is his biological brother. The way they view it seems clear cut to them. How can a Catholic Church build off something like that from the text like this and miss that? How can you miss the clear brother of the Lord? It means brother, right?
But it might not be. But they because the Catholics would say the same thing about that passage that they did about Mark 6 with the list of brothers. They'd say, well, it could just mean relatives. And apparently, from what I read, that is possible. But there was another word for cousins. Why didn't they use that? And it's like it means so-and-so because it has to mean that, or we're in trouble. And it's clearly that, though I will admit that I think it's Epiphanius' view that Joseph was an old man, already had kids, but Mary is a virgin and pregnant. And so it's like Joseph not wanting to send Mary away to save her disgrace. Well, in the same way, Epiphanius said, Jesus' mother had to be married when she delivered the baby, and so Joseph was really her custodian and her guardian, and this is why he doesn't appear after the nativity stories, even though Mary does. He was an old man. I mean, that is very clever. That works out. It's just that it seems lexically unlikely that Adelphoi and Adelphi, brothers and sisters, really means cousins. So I admit there's the same sort of a difficulty with the Christ myth theory, but that the arguments against it, or the Christ myth arguments, seem to me to be inherently plausible. Take your pick, though none of them are demonstrable, that's for sure.
I do think it's also interesting how you know, I asked this question on the Mythical Jesus and Historical Jesus Facebook group. There's, you know, constant like discussion and debate that goes on online, and the historicists came in, of course, they go to that passage of the list in Mark. They are using early gospels. They have certain frameworks they work off of in which they come to this position. But when you look at the way you're trying to look at this evidence, and you're saying, look, yeah, it might be just in Luke that they're making the cousin of Jesus, John the Baptist. I get the whole caliph or leaders of certain sects, though, being absorbed. And I find it kind of interesting, personally, where when I was being a Christian and Protestant to the Catholic Church, you find Peter's the guy. Why is Peter the guy? Isn't it James? Why? What's going on? And then it just it kind of blows me away. I wonder if these all were different sect leaders that are being absorbed. And in light of that, maybe you can comment, but also, if James existed, then Jesus must have existed. These types of things Eisenman would suggest, etc. What are your thoughts?
Well, if he was the physical brother of Jesus, well, then there was a historical Jesus. It's like two ways of saying the same thing, and it's circular. The question is that necessarily what this phrase denotes? And I think it is not, since similar things are said about Thomas as the brother of Jesus, and that there's evidence of missionary groups called the Brethren of the Lord's Brethren. I just don't think those are contrived.
Like 1 Corinthians 9,
yeah.
The Lord's brothers, plural, and Cephas. So you're suggesting this denotes a certain group, not necessarily biological kin of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and in light of that, I guess we'll finish on this question in James, because we can always do further ones down the road, is Gnosticism seems a very... If I were to put why this is even a contention in your mind, and you're not just hook, line, and sinker historicist, you don't just buy that, oh, well, the natural and Occam's razor to me just suggests that, is that Gnosticism plays a very big role, I believe, in your mind, in a lot of this. And I don't think a lot of people are factoring in Gnosticism. They don't really consider it as a possible threat to the theory. Do you see what I mean? And, you know, if Gnosticism's true, which, all right, let's go to the brother of Jesus, Thomas. You quoted in your readings, there's some Nag Hammadi stuff. There's some interesting things here. But also, don't we have the twin brother of Jesus in the Gospels we have? Isn't Thomas mentioned as a twin brother?
Of somebody, yeah. Judas Didymus Thomas. Didymus is Greek, Thomas Hebrew or Aramaic, both meaning the twin. And of course it's the constellation Tammuz is another version of the same name, and there's Castor and Pollux who are the twins. But that's... It's not said who it is, but many in the early church, apparently, especially in Syria, thought that Thomas was the twin brother of Jesus in a physical sense, and he was the Judas mentioned in Mark 6, because in various Syrian gospel stories, he is called Judas Thomas and Judas the twin. Since every other guy was named Judas, they would give you an epithet to distinguish you. So he was somebody's twin, and people said, whose? And why don't they say? Could it have been Jesus? But then as the perpetual virginity of Mary caught on, because that was a biggie for early Christian ascetics, they wanted to idealize Mary, and she eventually becomes a co-redemptrix and so on. They said, well, wait a minute, that lets out these others being blood relatives of Jesus, so she can't have had any more kids, not even, well, I guess they would still say you could have Jesus having stepbrothers, but not half-brothers, because that would still, unless they were, let's see, yeah, not half-brothers. If Joseph were the father of the people listed in Mark 6, that means they were stepbrothers, basically. But if they're half-brothers, they're sons of Mary. And though not of... though Jesus was that, but had no human father. And it's any of these things is possible, but they tend to depend too much on legends and so on. And
where do you draw the line?
yeah.
Join our Patreon